I'm Larry Weeks, and this is Bounce.
I found it really difficult to question seriously the advice that we were getting from doctors, knowing that there's no way I will ever know as much as this person about disease. But the big realization that I had in going through this illness that my son had was that his doctor knows more about disease, but that doesn't mean that he knows everything. We started thinking, oh my gosh, what else can we do? Or is he just going to be feeling bad his whole life on this medication? And we start, our minds sort of out of desperation open to other possibilities. It was a real revelation when he ended up recovering. We want facts and evidence, and that's what we base our work on. And so when a doctor says, we have evidence for this, we don't have evidence for that, that thinking was in line with how I had always operated. If you have exhausted the answers that traditional medicine has, that's not the end of the road.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Bounce podcast. My guest today is Susannah Meadows. Susannah is an author, a journalist. She's a former senior writer for Newsweek. She covered stories ranging from the 2004 presidential campaign, 9/11, to Hurricane Katrina. She's a frequent contributor to the New York Times, and her new book is called The Other Side of Impossible, which is about ordinary people who face daunting medical challenges and refuse to give up. And it's the topic of our podcast today. Susannah has compiled stories, and in some aspects, case studies about people who face severe medical challenges and the steps they took to overcome them. The family's journey into areas some might consider fringe, certainly outside of conventional medicine, but driven by desperation, looking for any way to alleviate their severe health problems. And what she learned is the topic of our discussions. We discuss the stories with Susannah. She talks about those, including herself, who were determined to find some path to a cure, which included some cutting-edge complementary therapies. We talk about the possible role food may play in reversing disease, the latest research into the mind's potential to heal the body. And that was very interesting and very similar to my discussion in an earlier podcast episode about the Wim Hof method with Scott Carney, about how one may be able to control autoimmune function. Very interesting. And we go into some detail on what she learned about anxiety and fear's impact on the body's response. And the body sometimes registers food as a threat, and there seems to be some usual suspects in that regard, specifically foods. But maybe more importantly, our discussion really is about the power of personal agency and hope. Someone said courage is knowing you're licked and doing it anyway. So these are primarily stories of courage, a mindset of perseverance. I really think you're going to enjoy this podcast. It's very interesting, and Susannah is very encouraging. So without further ado, here is Susannah. Susannah, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Larry. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so glad that you're on. So are you from Hilton Head, South Carolina?
Oh, funny. My parents have lived there for many years, but I grew up in both Cleveland and San Diego.
So you just, at one point, just looked for work in Hilton Head? Is that why?
At one point, well, after college, wow, it's so interesting. After college, I was living with my parents for a couple months and got a job writing for the daily paper in Hilton Head Island. So that was actually my first real job.
So you lived there for a little bit?
I lived there for 5 months and then moved to New York to work for magazines.
Then you worked for, is it Newsweek, right?
I did. Well, yeah, I mean, it wasn't a direct path to Newsweek, but I've spent most of my career at Newsweek. And finally left in 2010. But when I was there, I was just a correspondent covering all sorts of things, breaking news, and moved around the magazine.
I saw 9/11. You wrote about 9/11.
Yeah, we all were sort of thrown onto the story, as journalists everywhere were. And I ended up writing about a guy who had gotten people out. So that was a pretty intense experience telling that story.
Were you in New York in 9/11?
It's funny. I came back I was I was actually near Hilton Head when it happened. And I remember calling my editor. I was visiting my parents and I called my editor and she said, "Get back here." Ended up, there were no flights, as you remember. And so I ended up renting a car and driving back and then started reporting at that point.
Yeah. And you wrote about Katrina. I was in Hurricane Betsy.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if in your research so they had like 40, 50 years to try to prevent that again. And looks like they didn't do it when Katrina hit New Orleans.
Yeah, it was something else. I've never, as anyone who went down there, and you probably had this experience also, you've just never seen anything like that. And
Betsy, I was picked up in a boat. I don't know how we survived. We were in an attic. We were there. We just stayed.
Oh, wow.
Most of these houses in the neighborhood were just raised. They were like 3 feet up. They were on, kind of stilts or porches. And I remember playing as a kid under the house all the time. But the storm was coming. I took a nap and I remember waking up. I was a little tyke in a puddle of water. Now, this house was raised. I woke up in a puddle of water. We all went in the attic. And when it was over, the couches and beds were floating by, and that's how we jumped down from the attic on beds, and then they picked us up in boats. And so, yeah, it was crazy. So I'm a big tennis fan. You wrote about Serena Williams. What was she like? I'm just trying to get some tidbits here.
Yeah, you know what? She was lovely, and I was I was a fan of hers going into that story, and I spent a couple days with her. And, over the course of working at Newsweek over many years, you end up meeting quite a few famous people. And I have to say that of everyone I met, she was one of the loveliest, very, very real. It took a little time. I remember the first day I was with her, she seemed, she was just sort of keeping her distance a little bit. And, but after we got through that, and I kind of thought, you know what, that's okay. I'll just hang around and I don't need to talk to her. I don't need to get a good interview today. I have a couple days with her. And sure enough, she was really great to talk to and warm and kind and very, I was impressed with how unarrogant she was for who she was. I mean, it was really, she was really a quite normal person. And I have thought since then she would be wonderful to write about again. I mean, that's the impression she made on me.
Politics aside, what was Hillary Clinton like? Didn't you write about her?
Tough. Yeah. She was really hard to cover. She's a journalist's nightmare, really, because she's, we all know now how private she is, but that makes our jobs really difficult. And so getting a chance to talk to her was really hard.
What does private mean? Like when you say someone's private, they just don't talk about themselves? What is it?
Well, I think she just, she's just not interested in being interviewed.
Okay.
She in general is just not somebody who's comfortable, even though she's a very public figure, she's not somebody who is very comfortable with talking to the press. And so it was really pulling teeth anytime, you would ask for an interview or try to get time with her. It's not something that she
do you think that hurt her?
Did readily.
Do you think that hurt?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think, you hear about this private side of her where she's warm and funny and the people who work for her love her. But I think that because she protects that, the outside world sees a different side. They don't see that. And I think that, I think largely for worse, we have this system where people, where if you're good on TV, it helps you. And so, yeah, I think she definitely is hurt by that.
Yeah. Hopefully the people that are good on TV are also good people, but that's not necessarily the case. So
rarely do those overlap.
Yeah. And one last thing before we get to the book, just because you were a journalist, I bet you got really good at getting people to talk, and you had to, right? You had to be like a bartender or something. I don't know. Able to.
It's funny. I've been a bartender, but.
Well, there you go. There you go.
Right.
So any tips, like, I'm kind of new at podcasting, but any tips?
I think you're doing great.
Oh, is this okay? All right.
Yeah. I don't think you need any advice from me. No, I mean, I think that I what I've liked about my job is over the years is that I go after stories that I'm interested in. And so it's not an effort then to be talking to people because
No, I get that.
and so just like when you're deciding who to have on,
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So it's a natural process.
Tell us about this book. I was very curious about this topic for a number of reasons. One, the podcast is called Bounce, right? We're about how do you come back, right?
Yeah.
And I've had Caroline Miller, people talking about who she wrote about grit. I've had people who've written about resilience, and it's a theme through most of these people. And I see that in your book, right? These themes of coming back.
Sure.
Plus, I am one of those people, and you tell me, there seems like the world is divided into a couple of different types of people when it comes to all things medical. One is my dad. My dad's an old school Navy guy, a Depression era, greatest generation, where he holds college degrees in like on a pedestal. Like if somebody's got a degree and if they're a doctor,
right.
This is what my dad would always say. Do you have a degree in that? Do you have it, Larry? Do you have a degree? This guy went to school, Larry. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, don't question that type of, credentialing, what have you. And I'm all about, I question everything. Right. And and I cop to, Dr. Google, I go in there and research doesn't mean it's right. So
yeah, I think that point is really important because it is really hard. It was hard for me, even as a journalist. I ask questions for a living, but I found it really difficult to question seriously the advice that we were getting from doctors, knowing that, there's no way I will ever know as much as this person about disease. But the big realization that I had in going through this illness that my son had was that his doctor knows more about disease, but that doesn't mean that he knows everything, and that there are things outside of that expertise that may be worth exploring. And so that's sort of where the kind of journalist in me kicked in, where I came to realize that, you never stop asking questions.
The title of the book kind of just tells everything about it pretty much. And I want to ask you how to sum it up. So the book is The Other Side of Impossible, Ordinary People Who Face Daunting Medical Challenges and Refuse to Give Up. So if I summarize it this way, you tell me if I'm right. It's people who, out of motivation or desperation, yourself being one, who persisted in trying to find some alternatives that worked when traditional medicine maybe did not. Then discovering some workarounds or cures for, I'm using that term loosely, by using or avoiding food or using mind-body practices.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair summary. I mean, we in our own family, we were told when my son was 3 and was diagnosed with juvenile idiopathic arthritis, we were told he'd suffer with, he would struggle with this for life, and that this was not something he was likely to overcome. And so when when medication made him feel bad, and we started thinking, oh my gosh, what else can we do? Or is he just going to be feeling bad his whole life on this medication? And we start, our minds sort of out of desperation open to other possibilities. It was a real revelation when he ended up recovering. We had tried this other protocol that we heard about from another mom. And it really kind of upended my understanding of medicine for our son to recover when we thought he never would, and when medical opinion said he probably wouldn't. And so, and then when I started learning about, and in the course of, I first wrote about him in the New York Times Magazine. And when I was working on that story, I started hearing about all these other people who were doing similar things, who had incurable diseases, and they were finding ways of getting better. And the people that I wrote about amazed me, because I think when we went through it in our own family, I felt pretty helpless. I didn't have a lot of optimism at the beginning. I thought, you know what, this is just terrible. I mean, I didn't have a lot of fight, actually. I was just so upset. And I took our doctors at their word, and so I didn't have I ended up writing the book because when I heard about these other people, I was so blown away that they were able to have hope. And I wanted to understand that. I wanted to understand what makes people keep going, and what makes people think that they can find solutions when there are no solutions. Like, what makes them think they can solve it, something unsolvable? And that became a very central question for me.
So how did you do it? So you sounded, and you don't let me put words in your mouth, but you sounded like a traditionalist as far as medicine goes. Like, okay, if the doctor says this, then I do that, and then I live with whatever the results are.
Yeah, and I started out that way for sure, and also I think being a reporter, there's a big overlap between what reporters do and the way that doctors think, which is we want facts and evidence, and that's what we base our work on. And so when a doctor says, we have evidence for this, we don't have evidence for that, that thinking was in line with how I had always operated. And
you just got pushed into.
Well, I think I became desperate. When Shepard, my son, continued to feel bad, the medicine wasn't helping his arthritis much, and as I mentioned, it also made him sick. I think it was feeling desperate that I had to find something else. But I didn't go looking. I ended up hearing about, it was my sister, listen to this. It was my sister's husband's sister's friend who
I can see that though. People talk, people,
and
people
my
evangelize,
sister called me, So my sister called me and she said, do you want to talk to this woman? She went through something similar with her son. Her son recovered after they changed his diet and gave him a number of other things, including probiotics and fish oil. Do you want to talk to her? At first I said no. And then when I became desperate, I said, you know what, I'm going to call this woman. I'm just going to hear what she has to say. And but I do think it was desperation. And so then when I talked to her and she said, well, here's what we did. There's no way to know if this is the thing that made my son better, but it's harmless. And so here's what we did. And we talked to our doctor. We said, what do you think? And he said, it's fine with me. And so we proceeded, and we didn't take Shepard off his medication until his arthritis went away. And then we were able to wean him off the medication, which he was never supposed to be able to do. And it's been years now. How many years has it been? It's been 6 years.
So had it been bad, but not worse than it got it? In other words, if it was tolerable, you would have never
would have looked.
Saw it up.
No.
That's interesting. Yeah.
No. And I think that, I think that if, medication is effective for a lot of people who have autoimmune arthritis. And I think that if it had had that effect on him, if he had felt great on it, I don't think I would have gone looking. I was concerned about side effects and like long-term risks, but the fact is he was suffering, and there's really nothing like that for a parent. And so I think that was the real catalyst. I don't, it's hard to say, but it certainly was a process of going from real skepticism to, maintaining that skepticism, but also having a more open mind and thinking. And the realization was that I had never thought of before, was that there could be an answer out there that we just haven't figured out yet, or that we haven't proven
or discovered.
And just because it has not been studied doesn't mean it's not going to work.
Let me just throw this disclaimer out there. We're not making any claims about any cures here. The stories you're going to hear are anecdotal. This podcast is not prescriptive. It's investigative. I'm no doctor. I don't even qualify as a journalist. So I just want to say that to everybody. But because I'm going to get into this because it's fascinating, and you go out there and you should read this book. It's really fascinating, but especially for me because I'm kind of into this. I'm kind of a weekend athlete, right? So I have aches and pains, or I have some arthritis on my knee. So if someone said to me, sheep doo-doo, if you put it on your forehead for 3 days, I would probably just try it if I don't think it's going to hurt me. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. I mean, as with every decision we make, it's all about weighing the risks, right? So, when someone says my son got better after we changed his diet, and and took a couple foods out of his diet, that's not taking a risk. And so that was obviously a very important aspect of this.
And the other thing that was interesting to me is Novak Djokovic. Some years ago, first I saw him struggle at the U.S. Open and other tennis match. He would be panting, he'd be out of breath, and next thing I know, I'm seeing him win tournaments, and he's running like he's running Nadal tired, which no one can do that. And then I heard that he changed his diet; he went gluten free.
Right.
So I'm just looking for optimal. So I'm like, all right, I'm going gluten free. I don't have celiac or anything, but I'm going to try it.
Right.
So.
Right.
So all these things, and my poor wife, every little thing, I said, honey, I can't eat that now, so she's very accommodating. She makes gluten-free stuff. So I keep seeing these in your book. I'm reading about these usual suspects: gluten, leaky gut, but then what's great about the book also is that there's this mind-body piece of it, which I really want to get into. So is it your opinion? Are those usual suspects?
Is there a reason for it? Is what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, is gluten bad?
Well, that's the question I wanted to answer too, because you hear about it anecdotally all the time. I took gluten out of my diet, I felt better. And so we took gluten out of our son's diet. He got better after that. And by the way, impossible to say what made him better. We just don't know. But the timing lines up, and there were reasons to believe it was the gluten. But so I wanted to answer that question, and that was important for me throughout the book to look into the science. What do we know about gluten, for example, that suggests that it might have been a factor in our son's health and in other people's health? And the guy, I found the celiac disease researcher at Mass General, who has done the most important work on celiac disease and understands the effect of gluten on the body better than anyone I know of. And what he said to me was, there's celiac disease, which I think we all understand, and it affects, I think, 1% of the population, and we know about that. But then what this researcher, Alessio Fasano, said to me was that, but then in a certain percentage of other people, there is something called gluten sensitivity, and it can have all sorts of bad effects. It can lead to arthritis, for example. It can have all these problems. The issue is we don't have a way of diagnose. At this point, we can't diagnose gluten sensitivity.
I had no idea there was any kind of correlation to arthritis.
Yeah, and it can cause all these different kinds of problems. And what they're finding is the research he's doing is really interesting. So he I don't know how I don't think I should get too deep into the weeds here in terms of what sort of happens in the body, but basically it can exacerbate in certain percentages of people. Gluten can exacerbate a leaky gut situation, which is when too many proteins and bacteria are passing into the body that would normally not be allowed in. So in other words, as they're traveling through the large intestine, they would normally keep going and we would get rid of them. But if you've got a hyperpermeable lining to your intestine, that means more things are getting into your bloodstream than normally would. And that is the idea is then that triggers an autoimmune response. We don't know yet. The researchers don't know yet that leaky gut causes autoimmune disease, but there's a high instance of autoimmune disease among people who have a hyperpermeable gut lining. And we know from the research of this Dr. Alessio Fasano that gluten can exacerbate that in some people. So the picture is sort of starting to come together. There's more work to be done. But there is a reason. And so, and here's the other thing about gluten. So for most people, it's not an issue. You can eat gluten, your gut becomes a little more permeable, but you don't see any consequences of that. But the reason for that, what's interesting about it, I said to him, like, what's the deal with gluten? Why gluten? Why does this have this effect on people? And he said it's the only protein that our bodies cannot fully digest. I mean, the reason that we like gluten, the reason that people use gluten in bread is because it gives it that spongy quality. And the reason it has that spongy quality is because it doesn't fully break down. That's sort of why we use it, but it's also why it causes problems in the body. It looks, and the body reacts to it the way that it reacts to a harmful bacteria. It's really interesting. So there is a reason, to get back to your original question, there is a reason that gluten keeps coming up in the police lineup. It has a specific nature that can cause problems.
So when you wrote the book, it kind of started with your son, Shepard. And as you said, he was diagnosed, was it at 3 years old?
Yeah.
With juvenile arthritis and affected multiple joints. How's he doing now?
Oh, he's 100%. He's a perfectly healthy 9-year-old boy.
How rare is that for that condition, or is?
Well, so it's, I actually asked his doctor that, and he said, it is very rare and unexpected. He said, we just don't expect kids like Shepard to recover. And his case, I've asked him since then, well, so is there a possibility that arthritis can come back? And he said there's just so little information because kids, his story is so unusual. So we don't really know. We don't know that much about it. And the numbers are small anyway. I mean, there aren't a lot of kids who are affected by autoimmune arthritis.
So I was reading another interview where someone was talking to you about the book, and they asked you how you kept your despair at bay when your son was in constant pain. And your answer was interesting. You said you didn't.
Right. Right. I did. Yeah, it was a basket case. I mean, I think I look at other parents who go through much worse, who are able to maintain real strength. And what I learned when my son got sick is that I fall apart. I mean, it's kind of a terrible thing to learn about yourself. I didn't have any. I just was depressed. I couldn't sleep. And like I said before, I was not hopeful. And so I really admire those parents who soldier on, and who also find strength in the whole process, who are able to look at it as, I don't know, they're just a wonder to me.
You got some amazing stories. There was Dr. Terry Walls, am I saying that correct?
Yeah, Terry Walls, something else, right?
Overcame a progressive form of MS?
Yeah, which is, again, unheard of. I mean, that's just, it's literally unheard of. And I heard about her story. I heard that she'd gone from using a wheelchair to then riding a bike again. And I remember when I first heard it, I thought, oh my gosh, how has no one told her story? And she was the first person I called and said, can I write about you? Can I come see you? She's an incredible woman. I mean,
give us a little summary of her story real quick.
Yeah. So she's a doctor in Iowa. And her MS had progressed to such a state that she was using a wheelchair every day. She was able to get out of it. She was not confined to a wheelchair, but to get through the day, the fatigue was so overwhelming and her muscle strength was gone to such an extent that she needed to sit in a reclining wheelchair, because if she tried to sit up more, she would flop forward. She had no core strength left. So she was in really tough shape. And what's incredible about her, and I touched on this a little bit before, was that she actually had the nerve and the sort of audacity to think that she could find an answer. I mean, I think most of us in that situation would try to find a way to make peace and try to accept what we were dealing with. And she got to work. And she started doing research, started reading through all biomedical literature, which is available to anyone. There's a whole database maintained by the National Institutes of Health. She started digging through there, thinking maybe I can find something my doctors missed. And she ends up, she puts together this protocol based on some studies she's read about in mice, where mice given a certain amount of nutrients, saw improve. They lived longer lives. She had sort of put together this whole idea that maybe maybe her cells were dying because the mitochondria in them were dying. This is getting too into the weeds, but anyway, she puts together this protocol. She starts eating 12 cups a day of fruits and vegetables, and within months, she goes from using her reclining wheelchair to a scooter, from a scooter to using a cane, and then to walking around. I mean, it's an unbelievable story.
Was it her case that they're now studying that protocol?
Yeah. I mean, what's cool about her is that she knows she's one story, and you can't really take much from one story. And so as soon as she recovered, it was actually her boss, the head of medicine, said to her, you need to figure out if this can help anyone else. And so she immediately started raising money, working with the University of Iowa, and raising money to study what she had done. And she followed a group of people for 3 years, and then they've looked at all these different factors. They've looked at fatigue, and they've looked at how well their gait, how well they were able to walk over time. And about half the people saw improvement in those two factors. And she showed me video of, there was one woman who hadn't been able to walk upstairs in years, then was able to regain that ability. So it's remarkable. Her protocol includes not just the diet, but she also used electrical stimulation of her muscles, those things that physical therapists use. And so she was able to build back up muscle strength that way. And then people in her study also had that same therapy.
And through the book, I mean, you talk, there's arthritis, there's people with, I think, epilepsy and ADHD. So for Terry, was there an elimination part of that as well?
There was. So it was the usual suspect. So she cut out, although a little more extreme. I mean, she followed what she called as kind of a version of the paleo diet. So she cut out, with this leaky gut idea in mind, she cut out gluten, dairy, all grains, all legumes. And I think that's about it. And then she added back in this, just huge amounts of nutrients from eating 12 cups a day of fruits and vegetables, largely vegetables. It's just sort of a real testament to the power of food.
Yeah, because there's people listening who don't have these debilitating, or some do, and many might, right? But probably the majority of them don't. But they may not be as healthy. They may be struggling, and these are real struggles. If people have struggles with their weight, they have struggle with migraines, whatever it is. Right. I just want to, because one of the themes in the book is hope. This idea of don't give up. Take some control, research, read, because I'm sure all these things are, to some degree, based on individual biochemistry, how you react to something. But,
well, that's the thing. Yeah. And we can't, at this point, there's not enough information. There's not enough evidence to be able to say, for example, somebody with progressive MS, do this, and you will get better. We're really in the early stages here. But I got to say, if I had progressive MS, I would follow what Terry did to the letter.
Right. I'm saying if you're not feeling well, look at what you're eating, right? I'm just look at it and do some research and see, the combination of what should I eliminate, what am I not getting, that kind of thing. And I'm not prescribing. I'm just saying, like these people, just start talking and
there are places to look and there are things to try. I think that was the main. If you have exhausted the answers that traditional medicine has, that, at least what I discovered, that's not the end of the road. And that certainly if somebody in my family got sick again, the first thing I would do would be to get to work. And that includes, by the way, seeing multiple doctors. There's a story in the book, which is probably my favorite story in the book, about a family with a child dealing with epilepsy. And as you mentioned, and when I first wrote about her, and when I first met with her, the family had no luck. They had tried everything. They had tried every traditional medication. They had tried everything outside the box to help her. They had tried, they had tried cannabis, they had tried everything, and nothing had helped the daughter. And then they keep looking, they keep seeking answers. They end up going to yet another neurologist who says, this is 10 years into her disease. That neurologist says, hey, let's do an MRI. They do an MRI. He discovers a benign tumor. They remove the tumor. She no longer has seizures. And so to me, it's a testament to persistence. And that if they had accepted, multiple doctors have told us that this is how things are, and that we've tried everything, nothing's helping her. And I think that there are plenty of people, and maybe, I don't know where I would fall in this, but I think that there are plenty of people who would find a way to accept that. And, it's a great lesson, I think.
You know what I thought of when I was reading your book is Lorenzo's oil.
Oh, funny. You know what? I've never seen the movie, but I have heard, but I know the gist of it.
So as soon as we get off this call, you got to go rent it.
Yeah,
it's amazing, the story, because it's right down the alley of the message of this book. It's the Adones. I think it's Augusto. I may be saying the name wrong, but their son had horrible seizures. Thank God he had the resources to travel all over and talk to all these doctors, but they're all like, no. He would go to groups, families, communities where their children had this disease, and they all said, don't rock the boat. What are you doing? These protocols aren't proven. And he lived, I think, 20 years longer than...
Oh, is that right? I didn't realize that. Yeah. And I understand a lot of other children have been helped by what they discovered, if I'm saying that correctly.
Right.
Yeah.
They rewrote medical history because now there's that protocol, and it's very, very, it's even more effective, I think, early onset. So there's so much in the book, and this is where I'm incredibly curious. Like, so first in these stories, and specifically for your son, there was elimination and he got better. You avoided certain foods, but then you reintroduced these foods and
Right.
you used, is her name Amy Theringer? Am I saying her name?
Terringer.
Terringer,
Yeah,
sorry,
it's a German
Terringer.
last name. Yeah.
She's got a method or some kind of protocol that is this using the mind-body connection. Can you tell us about that? Because I certainly believe in the mind-body connection, but was his reactions organic to start and then they became psychosomatic, or?
I know. Well, there aren't clear answers, Larry. Here's how it came about. One of the women that I write about is this woman, Amy Terringer, who developed on her own a therapy for children with severe food allergies to be able to eat, to be able to be safe and eat those foods again. And that's so in the medical world, if you are diagnosed with severe food allergies today, there's nothing medicine can do for you. There's no cure, there's nothing except the advice that you need to stay away from this food because you are threatening your life if you have it. Okay. So this woman, Amy, developed this protocol and has many different aspects to it. But one of the pieces of this therapy involves cognitive behavioral therapy. And the reason for that is that she noticed that when she was working with these children to try and help them overcome their allergies, she noticed that when she would try and reintroduce a food to somebody, they could have a response that was a kind of panic response once they were, and it dawned on her that it looked a lot like PTSD. She had been through it herself, and she said, oh my gosh, it looks like this child is experiencing PTSD. And why not? This is somebody, for the example in the book is a child who'd gone, been raced to the hospital in an ambulance and had gone, and that is, it's a life-threatening thing. The throat's closing and the parents are afraid their child's going to die. Okay. So you've been told all your life, if you eat this food, it can kill you. And so, this insight that anxiety, she had this insight that it was possible that anxiety was exacerbating the allergic response.
Oh, so it wasn't causing it. It was just exacerbating or making it worse.
Yeah. So it's not like, because people are born with allergies. So, there has to be this sort of there has to be a sort of history of fear for there to be an anxiety around a food, right? There has to be this sort of history of reactions. And so she started working with children to try and quell their fear around a certain food. And she saw, and this is all anecdotal, she saw an incredible response. And so I ended up speaking, because it's such an amazing, it's hard to believe. So I spoke to the parents of 100 children who have gone through this therapy with Amy, all of whom had severe food allergies before and had a record of, a medical record of allergies diagnosed, and had actually had their responses. And then after this, going through this therapy that involved cognitive behavioral therapy, among other things, we're now able to eat everything. And they're, to Boston Children's credit, so she lives in the Boston area, and what happened was patients in the allergy program at Boston Children's stopped going because their allergies were gone. Yeah, so they stopped going, and so Amy one day gets a call from the head of the department saying, "What are you doing? What's going on here? These kids are recovering." And so last year, I think it was, they embarked on a study of her protocol to try and understand, well, first of all, to document, was it really the therapy that was having this effect? Or was it just that they were, because people do outgrow their allergies. So they wanted to compare kids who'd been through her process to regular kids. So they went through that, and they're in the process of looking at that data now. But it's a huge story if she has figured out how to cure kids of allergies. So then when I said, and I approached her and I said, "I'd like to write about you and what you've done," she said, "Why don't I work with Shepherd?" She knew his story. And she said, "Why don't I work with him? Because then you'll really understand what I do. I don't want you writing about me without really having a full understanding of the therapy." And, the reason that we agreed to do it had nothing to do with the book. What it had to do with was there had been a couple instances since Shepherd had recovered when he had accidentally had gluten and had instant flare-ups and was in pain again. And so my husband and I thought, if he could be free of that and not be vulnerable to arthritis, an arthritis flare-up, then let's give it a shot. So then he went through the therapy with her, and she reintroduced foods to him, and he's totally fine. He's able to have foods.
It kind of makes sense. And by the way, CBT, for everybody, cognitive behavior therapy, is the idea. It's this therapy of, you feel the way you think, and so you're disputing thoughts, or you're reframing. I'm oversimplifying. By the way, Dr. David Burns, one of the pioneers I interviewed. So there's an episode, I don't know if it's 4 or 5, just for everybody out there. It makes sense because, like Dr. Burns was saying, he would treat anxieties. People wouldn't get in elevators. These people would break out. But once they overcame the fear, they had no physical reaction. So it makes sense.
So another aspect of it is, you just mentioned hives. So there are a lot of reactions. So there are physical responses to anxiety that look an awful lot like physical responses to an allergy attack, elevated heart rate and like you said, hives. So there is, just sort of comparing the two things, there does seem to be an overlap.
This is so fascinating. And I was at work a few companies ago where there was a gal in our workspace who had some type of food allergy, and she couldn't smell. If we brought food in to the kitchen area, it would waft through the workplace. She would have a reaction by the smell. So there's certain foods we couldn't bring. So that makes sense. You want to have him to be less fragile around that.
Well, and for children, he's in a different category. I mean, for children who have life-threatening allergies, he was vulnerable to an arthritis flare. But yeah, I mean, for them, for the children who've gone through her therapy and are now eating everything, which, by the way, includes my niece, which is the reason I heard about this therapy. My niece had 14 food allergies. She went through the therapy. She's now eating everything. I mean, that has a huge impact on not only the child's life, but the family's life.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think that. Yeah, because of the preparation and the planning.
Oh, and
planning.
and the constant anxiety, the constant worry. You don't want to let your child out of your sight.
So then, was it expected to cure, or was it more trying to manage the fear?
The point of it is to make you safe. So that you are not. The point of it is these children with severe food allergies are vulnerable to, their throats closing, and so the idea is, and she doesn't claim to have cured them. She describes it as sort of a workaround that allows them to be in the world and not be afraid of.
So they may be symptom free, but they may still have the allergies, just biochemically.
I mean, who knows? I mean, I think this is what we will learn, and and that's what's it's so great that Boston Children's is studying this, because I have 1,000 questions for you I have 1,000 questions about what this means. How is it working? What part of it is working? It's totally fascinating. Our allergy, like how much of it is the mind? How much of it? It's fascinating. We have very little information. We have very compelling anecdotal information about, these 100 kids and more who've had success. But we need to study it more,
Have you heard of Wim Hof?
No.
They call him the Iceman. Just Google him. He is able to control his autoimmune response. And he can stay encased in ice for, what scientists have clocked as time that would kill you. You'd go hypothermia. He can handle extreme temperatures, but he goes into this meditative state, and he's now teaching people these methods.
Oh, cool.
And they're able to do the same. And a guy wrote a book. I interviewed him. His name is Scott Carney, and it's called "What Doesn't Kill Us." And Scott is a journalist like you, but he went to disprove Wim. He went to the Netherlands, where Wim was giving these workshops, saying, "Okay, this guy's a quack, and he's going to kill people." And then he saw people coming off of a mountain in the winter that killed, the Nazis in shorts with steam coming off their backs.
Interesting, yeah.
And it's all this mind body connection, and it's really fascinating. And then he goes through some stories about people who had rheumatoid arthritis who studied Wim's methods and who've managed pain, gotten off of wheelchairs, just crazy stuff, right?
Well, one of the people that I was most excited to talk to in my book is the guy. He's the head of psychology head of psychiatry, at McLean Hospital, which is the Harvard affiliated psychiatric hospital. And he is a fascinating person. What he says is, he believes that most of the chronic disease in America, in the world, is rooted in the mind, and that we have yet to, we've barely looked into it. We don't understand it at all. And there are people so he has actually gathered, he is embarking on a study of his own, where he has talked to 100 people who had diagnosed terminal illness, verified by either biopsy or imagery, who spontaneously recovered without any treatment. And what he's doing is he's talking to them and interviewing them to try and understand, to try and figure it out. What is it that took place? What is it that happened to them that to allow them to go from having a disease to not? And he said that it just sort of in his preliminary conversations with them, there's this theme that's emerged where people underwent a kind of reconsideration of themselves, where if they once they sort of reevaluated how they thought about themselves. He said that that's been, and where if they once had complaints about themselves, they no longer did. There was sort of like this. I mean, it's fascinating. So he said that that's been a common theme among all these people, that they went from, in the course of their recovery, had different feelings about themselves than they had before. And it's sort of his kind of thesis that is somehow related to their recovery. And we'll see if the research bears this out. But it's really, there's so much there that we haven't looked at.
It's so fascinating. I'm reconsidering, just Susannah, just the people I've talked to on the podcast, in people like you, and in books I've read, and these are credible people that I'm reconsidering. I'm reconsidering hypnosis, everything, just auto suggestion.
I mean, this is the Harvard guy saying this.
Yeah. And these are, I'm like, okay.
Right. Well, look at it this way also, Larry. I mean, so we all know about the placebo effect, right?
Well, I think that's what I think these things are like, somehow placebo triggers, like they're suggestions that kicks your brain into, placebo's a real thing. It's been around forever.
It's real. We know it. It's a major reason why people recover. We know that there are certain chemicals that can get released in the brain, but we don't fully understand it. We don't study it. It's part of studies. We barely have studied what the placebo effect, like what happens and why. But it is likely to happen. This is something that I found interesting. The placebo effect is likely to happen anytime you are in a setting where you expect to get better. And so that's a very broad, I mean, think of how broad that is. It's not just like taking a sugar pill. It can be like sitting in the doctor's office and seeing somebody come in a white coat,
In your book, we're talking about the confidence that Amy instilled in people. And they're like, could that be part of the trigger that tells the brain, okay, go,
Right. Well, if the definition is, yes, I don't know if I even said it correctly, but if you're in this setting with the expectation that you will get better, like that's a key part of the placebo effect, is that you have the expectation that you will get better. Like you think you're the one who's given the pill in the study that's the active pill.
And now I'm thinking, how important is the doctor's bedside manner?
I have come to believe that it's everything.
It could be everything. Yeah. So if the guy's sitting there just like phoning it in, mailing it in, like, okay, here, take this medication, whatever, see you.
Yeah.
You'll go home and die. Yes. But
it's huge.
You have somebody who believes in you and is optimistic.
Yeah. I mean, if people recover, if a large percentage of people recover when they expect to get better, and then you see a doctor who's pessimistic, or you see a doctor who's hopeful and encouraging. I mean, think of that. It's a huge, huge part of recovery that we barely pay attention to.
Yeah. Well, it's just so fascinating. And I wanted to ask you this. In talking with these folks, you said that early life experiences and coping with adversity may inoculate people against hopelessness and prompt them to believe that if they would just keep trying, they would succeed. Do you think that early exposure to challenges or failure is kind of a prerequisite for this later perseverance in life?
I don't know. I mean, I wanted to sort of, that was like I just wanted to know where does that come from? Like why do some people keep going and other people quit? And it led me to this researcher at University of Colorado who had looked at that exact thing with mice, and he had subjected them to a kind of difficult experience. They were like, got little shocks to their tails. And the group that could turn off the shock, the group of mice that could actually like turn the wheel and turn off the shock, when they were later put in that situation again, they persisted until the shock was over. And then the mice who had been shocked earlier, but then they couldn't turn off the shock, they're put in the situation again and they don't try. And so it's a small study, it's rodents, blah, blah, blah. But what it suggests is that if at time one you overcame a difficult circumstance, you are then for the rest of your life. So he followed these mice for the rest of their life. That was this kind of key detail. And the word I love, and you just used it, and it was used in this study, and I love it, is you are then inoculated. These mice were then inoculated for life against feeling helpless or giving up. So, and I asked him, I said, oh my gosh, this is, I was talking to him about his study, the scientist, and I said, so does that mean, if you have this circumstance earlier on and you've overcome difficult circumstances, and I was talking about how the people that I wrote about most of them had overcome difficult childhoods. And I was saying, so do you think that that's why they were so persistent later on when they were confronted with a difficult situation? And he said, science can never explain individuals. He kind of poured cold water on it. He said, science can never explain individuals. It can, it can sort of suggest things about populations. But so he was not willing to sort of, make any sort of conclusive statement about that, but yeah, the research suggests that if you have that history, that you might benefit later on.
I had Caroline Miller on, who wrote a book on grit, and she's a contemporary of Angela Duckworth. And I think you talked to did you talk to Angela?
I did talk to Angela,
okay.
yeah.
And she was saying how that we're ruining kids by not having them lose a soccer game, because everybody wins. We're handicapping them because we're taking away any kind of difficulty, and everybody's a winner. And she was making a very good point. I thought.
I think so too. In fact, it was Angela who told me about that mouse study because I was asking her what makes people gritty, and she had said, "Well, we don't know, but you should talk to this guy who did this one study." Yeah, so that's there's not a lot of information, but that's what we have. But it also is common sense, right? It just, to me, it's absolute common sense.
Is common sense less common? No, I don't know. It's the world is upside down
Probably,
in some way.
Yeah.
So outside of the experience and the benefits you saw with your son and what you've come to realize about food and diet, or maybe you already knew it, but it was validated, I don't know. But has the book changed you in any other way, writing this book?
Yes. I think that I think it was meeting these other people that I wrote about, who just had were able to maintain hope in situations where it's kind of, you can't imagine they would still be hopeful. And so I think that I take that from them. And I do think that, having seen these examples of people who found answers where there weren't any, that if I were in that situation again, I do think that I would feel like, okay, maybe there's something out there. Maybe there is an answer that no one else has discovered, and maybe I can be the one to discover it. I think that and it could be because also my son recovered. We went through that difficult circumstance, and we did find an answer for him. And so I do think that next time around, I would be much more hopeful, for sure.
Yeah. I think people including me, get pessimistic when we think we have no options. You know what I mean? It's
right.
And we usually have way more than maybe a parent.
Well, yeah. Well, usually there needs to be an example, like one example, right? One example you can kind of cling to. Oh, this person got better, so maybe I will. But what's extraordinary is when people are hopeful, even when there's nothing.
This has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Susannah. I got to ask you the time travel question. Okay. The time travel question is a movie I saw called Disaster in Time, where the main character goes back into time and he finds himself in jail. And go with me here because it's a movie. But he's in jail. He gets his one phone call, and the call he makes is to himself in the present time. Let's say I could give you a phone and you could call yourself in the past. Mm-hmm. So the question is, when would you call yourself?
Right.
And then what would you say?
Right. I would say, you dummy, talk to that woman right away who helped her son.
You almost didn't. Is that right?
Yeah, I almost didn't, and it took a while. And I do think that she is the reason that he got better.
And why didn't you? What was the hesitation?
Because it was one story with no evidence, and it was, it wasn't coming from our doctor. We were seeing a great doctor. Why would I believe this one anecdote? Why would one anecdote, help us? That's not evidence. It's not science. And now I have a new appreciation I still appreciate and want evidence, but now I know that, that's a best case scenario, and there isn't always going to be great evidence. And that doesn't mean that we stop looking.
Do you have I just have to ask you, do you have any other opinions now about food and diet? Like ketogenesis is a big thing now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's helped a lot of people. Yeah. There are people with epilepsy who've been helped by the ketogenic diet. I know that.
Have you changed your diet because of all this research?
Yeah, I mean, I think I ate pretty well before, but when you spend time with Terry Walls, the woman who had MS, who was eating 12 cups a day and still does eat 12 cups, you cannot spend time with her without walking away thinking, oh my God. So if this woman went from wheelchair to riding her bike again, then what can that diet do for me?
You'll be running marathons, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we are hardcore in our house about vegetable intake.
Are you doing, can I do a powder? Like I do a powder, or do you you have to blend it every day? Can you just buy a powder?
I am a big believer, and we didn't get into this at all. But all this emerging research about the microbiome and how relevant our bacteria are to our health. We know that now. We know that there is a strong link between a healthy gut bacteria population and our health.
I'm taking probiotics.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you. But listen to this.
Oh no.
The main way,
listen, I mean, tell me about lectins.
One of the main ways that we can affect that population is to feed it, and to feed it well. And what does it thrive off of? Fiber. And we know that people who have high fiber diets, and that means like eating whole fruits and vegetables. We know that people who have high fiber diets live longer. That's established. And so for me, going forward, and for our family, we pay a lot of attention to fiber. And that, I think as the science continues to emerge about the microbiome, that may end up being the explanation for a lot of the stories in my book, including Terry Wall's recovery, is that she, because they have found people with various diseases, especially autoimmune, there's a correlation between that and an unhealthy bacteria population. And so it could be that she turned things around, and that's what made the difference.
So plants and vegetables, that kind of thing. Are you blending it up? Or you?
No. Well, so here's the snag about blending. I mean, you get the nutrients, but you're not getting the fiber, or you're getting reduced fiber, because you're kind of, you want the fiber is the stuff that your body can't digest. It's whatever is left.
So you got massive plates of vegetables, and
that's how we're doing it.
I just want to drink something.
Well,
Susannah,
you'll get lots of nutrients that way too. And I think, and Terry Walls, I'm trying to think here, she made smoothies. There's nothing wrong with a smoothie.
All right. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I want it easy. I don't want to work.
None of us do.
This is so good. The book is really so good. I encourage everybody to go read it. And it sounds like there's another book out there in you about this stuff.
I don't know. Maybe. I mean,
Okay.
there are a lot more stories out there for sure of people doing amazing things. That's true.
I love the mind, the mental part of this whole thing is just so fascinating.
It's empowering, isn't it? It makes you think, gosh, there might be things down the road that can help us.
It's like, I don't have to wait for somebody to fool me. There may be a way to trigger that placebo.
Yeah, well, you can get a placebo effect even if you're having the placebo. You can actually there's a company for this, of course. You can buy a thing that says placebo. It's just like I don't know what it is, like a piece of gelatin or something. I don't know what it is, but it's called a placebo.
Really?
And you take it.
Oh,
yes.
man, as a marketer, how did I miss that? Oh, man.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now my mind's rolling. There's got to be something. I'll make the drink, the placebo water or something.
Perfect.
There you go. Listen, thank you so much. This has been great. I really appreciate you coming on. And like I said, it was a great book. And they can find you at SusannahMeadows.com, right?
Yeah, you can find me there. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter. I'm there, kind of.
You're not there. You just have
not really.
You just have a domain, yeah.
But but the book's you can buy the book on Amazon or anywhere you buy books. But anyway, thank you so much.